Whether you're crafting, cooking, or on the job, using proper quality tools is essential to the outcome. Today, we're going to take a closer look at tools for knitters. But before we dive into looking at the different types of knitting needles, there's one important thing that everyone needs to be aware of, and that is counterfeits. Whatever you do, never, and I mean never, purchase needles from Amazon or any similar marketplace. Only buy needles from reputable dealers. The market is flooded with counterfeit needles, and all of the brands we carry have been copied, and the imposters are what you'll likely receive if you're purchasing from anything but a legitimate source. These needles are of very poor quality and often give these labels a bad rap. Make no mistake, these are not the same needles and aren't even close copies. They are awful, and do not be tempted by their lower price. I can promise you that no matter how low the price is, it's way too high for these lousy knockoffs. Now that we have talked about that, let's say it's very important to remember, we've actually had people in who said, oh, I've bought those, they were terrible. I'm like, no, you didn't. You ordered them off Amazon, not the same thing. But now that we talked about counterfeits, let's take a look at knitting needles. I know that all the different types and sizes of needles can be so confusing, especially for someone just getting started. When anyone thinks of a knitting needle, straight or single point needles are usually what come to mind. They are the most basic type of needles and are most likely the first needle that you'll use. They come in varying lengths, with 14 inch as the longest standard size for a variety of reasons. If they were much longer than this, you could possibly impale someone or even yourself. Some knitters continue to use straight needles that actually prefer them. Typically, these knitters tend to hold or prop the needle under their arm as they knit. The British are particularly fond of straight needles, and that is why many of the Rowan patterns you'll find are not written for circular needles. While some knitters will stick with straights, a majority of the knitters we see will move to circulars as their preferred needle. Circulars are basically shorter needle tips on an attached cable. You can work back and forth on these just like straight needles, or you can work in a continual circle with the stitches positioned around the entire needle without turning. If you are working flat, you can work with any length of cable, but it's best to choose one that's long enough to comfortably accommodate all the stitches, yet not so long that the cable flops around and drives you nuts. If you are working in the round, you will need to choose a cable that allows the stitches to comfortably distribute around the needle without forcing them to stretch out of shape. You'll also want to avoid having so many stitches crunched around a cable that it becomes difficult to manage. The most important feature of a circular needle is the cable and the join. All of the needles we stock will have a pliable cable and a smooth join. While circular needles have drastically improved, many lower quality needles are still on the market. If you are using a circular needle with a stiff cable that is driving you crazy, or you have to fight the stitches getting stuck at the join and around at the needle and the cable, you really should just pitch this in the trash and let us hook you up with a better needle. Interchangeable needles have really come into their own in the past decade or so. While they are hardly new, dating back to the mid-century and Boy's Needle Master, the older sets leave a lot to be desired. Today's interchangeable needles have drastically improved, and they are now as joyful to use as their fixed circular counterpart. Interchangeable needles are sold as sets or separate tips and cables, allowing you to create multiple lengths of circular needles with merely one set of tips. They are really handy to have on hand, and we highly recommend. The standard 5-inch tips are designed to create needles ranging from around 24 to 60 inches. If you want to make shorter circulars, you will need to use something shorter than these tips. Anything smaller will need a shorter tip. They make smaller, either 3.5 or 4-inch tips, and these will make needles as short as a 16-inch. While the shorter tips can be paired with a cable of any length and work, many knitters find the shorter tip less comfortable to use with the longer cables. The longer tips just simply will not work with the short cable because they won't stretch around and make a circle. The cables are too short and the tips will be too long. It won't work. You're just going to have to trust me on that. One of the challenges of creating an interchangeable needle set are the universal join. All of the needles in the set must be able to connect to the same cable. For this reason, you will typically not find sets that extend from the tiny up to the very large sizes. They tend to stick more in between, say size 3 through, some sets go up to 11, maybe 17 or more common. One of the benefits of the Chagou system is that the needle sizes have been categorized as mini, small, and large, with each size within that range paired with a comparable sized cable. Therefore, all cables do not have the same joins. Having different cable sizes makes these systems a bit more confusing and less straightforward, but as a result, you can create sizes ranging from the very, very tiny to the very large, plus very, very short. The stainless steel twist sets will give you the most options due to the durability of the steel. Their spin bamboo sets will have a more limited size range beginning at a size 2. Chagou shorties are a must-have for those who love to knit on super short circulars. If you prefer a system with a universal join, we absolutely love Likey and Lantern Moon sets. The cables interchange between both sets, plus the Knitter's Pride sets as well. If you've already invested in different tips and cables, you will not need to start all over with new parts. The longer tips range from sizes 4 to 17, and the shorter tips from 3 to 10.5 and up to 17, depending on the brand. Knitters either love or hate double points. Personally, I can knit on anything and prefer double points for many projects. Double points actually predate the invention of circular needles and were designed for knitting objects in the round, whether it be a sock with a small circumference or a larger project like a sweater. Now, can you imagine trying to knit a sweater on long steel double points? While I say I can knit on anything, I even think that would be a nightmare. Basically, you would use double points for projects worked in the round with a circumference too small to fit around a circular needle. Modern double points are packaged in quintets. The stitches are typically arranged around a triangle of 3 needles. You work around the triangle, knitting 1 needle of stitches off onto an empty needle as you spiral around the work. You can also distribute the work in a square around 4 needles, working around the piece with the 5th. It looks much more difficult than it really is. You only work with 2 needles as usual, with the other needles just hanging around waiting. One of the newer takes on double points are the Flexi Flip needles from Oddie. Instead of rigid needles, these consist of very, very short circular needles. This tiny bit of cable allows the needles to bend or flex, and they come in sets of 3. You can either get the metal or the bamboo. I lay my work out on a triangle with all 3 needles, half of the stitches on the middle needle and a quarter on the other 2. This allows me to place a stitch marker between the first and last needle. I won't need an empty needle and can simply continue working across the first needleless stitches so that they are now distributed all onto 1 needle. This places my beginning of the round in the middle of this needle, and my stitch marker won't fall off like with double points. I then continue working around just like with double points. There is so much to say about knitting needles, more than I can fit in one video. I'll be following up soon with a look at the crazy sizing systems and the even more crazy history behind them. You're going to want to stay tuned for this one.